Small towns in America promise quiet streets and familiar faces, but between the church bells and Friday night lights, there are names that no one says out loud anymore. Year after year, reports are filed, search grids are drawn, and porch lights burn through the night for people who never come home. In counties where everyone knows everyone, the absence is louder than sirens. Lockers left untouched, tractors rusting at the edge of fields, dinner plates stacked for a guest who doesn't arrive. The records call them missing. Their families call and keep calling. Tonight, we open the case files these towns would rather forget. Disappearances folded into folklore, leads that went cold before the coffee did, and institutions that look helpful until you ask the wrong question. We're not here to sensationalize. We're here to listen, to the patterns, to the paper trails, and to the people who still set an extra place at the table. This is Voices from the Other Side. If this work matters to you, if you believe silence should never have the last word, tap like so these stories travel farther, subscribe to hear each voice as we find it, and share this episode with someone who understands that remembering is a kind of rescue. Now, let's begin. In Riverside, Montana, Charity came with a casserole, a prayer, and a bill no one could afford. Names and locations have been altered to protect sources. What follows draws on interviews, public filings, and a survivor's notes. Angela doesn't come to Riverside looking for trouble. She comes for keys, silver ones to a farmhouse that smells like cedar and mothballs, left to her by a great aunt she met once at a reunion where the potato salad outlasted the conversation. The lawyer says the gift comes with 20 acres and a savings account that'll cover fresh paint and a new water heater. The drive up from Denver is all sky and pale grass, telephone poles pacing her like sentries, the town itself a handful of brick and memory ringed by cottonwoods. On her third evening the doorbell rings. A man with silver hair and soft hands stands on the porch, casserole steaming in a glass dish, smile calibrated to comfort. "Pastor David Brennan," he says, and he knows her aunt's name before she says it. He knew Ruth for decades. He's sorry for Angela's loss. The fellowship he leads runs the food bank and the shelter and the community dinner each Wednesday. If she needs anything, someone from Riverside Fellowship will be there. Angela goes to the dinner because it seems impolite not to. Church basement light, pot roast in aluminum trays, a prayer that thanks the Lord for abundance and for neighbors who show up. People do show up. Older couples who bless her heart. Young parents whose kids fidget until dessert. A few faces that have the look of the shelter, tired but tidy. Pastor Brennan makes an announcement in a voice that lands like a blanket. Volunteers needed for the thrift store, the deliveries, the rides to clinics. "We do what we can with what we've got," he says, and the room hums with approval. She signs up for the thrift store because it feels harmless. The manager, Carol, is brisk and bright and knows every regular by name. The front of house is clean order, racks by size, lamps that almost match, books sorted by genre and dust. The back room is a city of bags and boxes, a backlog Carol calls the avalanche. Sometimes, when a man in a tan jacket or a woman with 3 kids comes in, Carol walks them to the back, past the "no customers beyond this point" sign, and the conversation drops to a whisper. They leave by the rear door with a coat that fits too well for random luck, a sturdy walker that looks new, a sealed box slipped into a tote. Charity moves differently when it doesn't want an audience. On Saturdays, Angela rides along on the food route, because sitting alone in a house that hasn't learned her shape yet feels worse. Her driver, Tom, is a quiet man in a ball cap who taps the steering wheel when the radio plays songs from the 90s. The route zigzags past the grain elevator, down to the trailers by the tracks, out to the lonely mailboxes with flags that haven't waved in months. At each stop Tom lingers, longer than the weight of a grocery box should require. Sometimes a hand appears at a door with an envelope. Sometimes Tom returns with fewer cans than he carried in. "They like to talk," he says when she asks, eyes on the windshield. "We bring more than food." Back at the farmhouse, dust gives up secrets one drawer at a time. In Ruth's closet, tucked inside a shoe box beneath a stack of church bazaar flyers, Angela finds bank statements with monthly withdrawals that look less like donations and more like dues. There are notes in a tight, patient hand. They are watching the house. The phone clicks. "Special services not listed anywhere. If anything happens to me, look where the wall sounds hollow." It takes 2 hours of tapping the basement foundation with a broom handle to find it, a loosened stone behind the water heater. Behind the stone, a manila envelope sealed with aging Scotch tape. Inside, photographs of grocery boxes with false bottoms, printed spreadsheets with codes that map to pill counts, names, dates, an index card with a list of funerals and the words "no autopsy" underlined 3 times. A page near the back reads, "I thought we were helping. Then I learned what they put in the green beans." When Angela starts cross-checking, the pattern refuses to look away. Elderly recipients who complained about mix-ups in their deliveries or who stopped answering the door when volunteers came are dead within weeks. Peacefully, the paper says, "At home." The pastor says at the podium, "As we should all be so blessed." Someone whispers in a pew, "Estates managed by trustees who also sit on the fellowship's advisory board. Properties transferred to shell nonprofits, then sold to family friends." Sheriff Rita Valdez signs off on death certificates that read natural causes like a rubber stamp. And when Angela asks for reports, the clerk sighs and mentions a hard drive crash and a backlog in budget cuts. Someone is in the farmhouse when she returns from the library one afternoon. Nothing is stolen. Everything has been moved half an inch, the way you test how jittery a mouse is. A window latch that was closed is open. The envelope is no longer behind the stone because Angela has learned that secrets don't belong where you sleep. She keeps duplicates now. One set in the trunk, one in the lining of a suitcase, one mailed to herself and left unclaimed at the post office box she rented in a different name. The next Wednesday, Pastor Brennan stops by the thrift store to thank volunteers and remind them of the Lord's economy. "When we give, we never run out," he says, and Carol smiles like a student catching the teacher's eye. That night a car follows Angela from Main Street to the turnoff by the old mill and keeps its distance like a dog deciding whether to bite. She doesn't pull into the farmhouse. She drives past it 2 miles farther than 3 and only turns around after the headlights behind her peel away into the dark. Fear clarifies what matters. Angela scans, prints packs. The casserole dish from week 1 washed but unreturned goes into a cupboard she never opens. Before dawn she heads south, the envelope buckled in beside her like a passenger. At a rest stop, a man sits 2 tables away listening to nothing. On the highway, a black SUV appears in the mirror and vanishes behind a cattle truck. At the state capitol she parks in a garage, and carries the evidence in a reusable grocery bag because paper blends better into paper. The reception desk at the Attorney General's office asks whether she has an appointment. She doesn't. She has photographs, ledger pages, a typed list of names that matches a cemetery's new stones. She has notes in a dead woman's hand and a living woman's memory. When the assistant AG asks who told her to come, Angela says, "My Aunt Ruth," and watches the man decide whether that counts. The investigation doesn't move like TV. It moves like bureaucracy catching fire, quietly, then all at once. Subpoenas reach across a county where everyone owes someone a favor. A task force stitches together what the thrift store ledger tried to hide. Volunteers flip when they understand the difference between grace and a plea deal. The sheriff's cruiser sits empty in front of the station while agents inventory the hard drives. In the fellowship office, binders labeled with verses give way to bank accounts labeled with numbers. When the arrests come, they break the town like a fever. Pastor David Brennan is charged with trafficking and elder exploitation and homicide. 12 associates follow him into the chain-link shadows of the detention center. Sheriff Valdez is booked for obstruction and corruption. Her badge goes into a plastic tray. The fellowship's building is taped off. The church basement tables sit bare under buzzing lights. Everyone says they knew nothing. Everyone says they had their suspicions. These claims overlap so perfectly they cancel each other out. Angela does not go back for the casserole dish. She does not stand on the farmhouse porch and pretend the view is the same. She sells the property and donates the proceeds to an organization that has transparent audits and volunteers who open boxes in the light. When she signs the closing papers, the notary asks whether Riverside was a nice place to grow up. Angela says it looks like one on postcards. Months later, if you drive that county road at dusk, you'll see the house with boards across the windows and a for lease sign tilting in the field, dandelions glittering like coins no one will pick up. In town, the thrift store front is still tidy, but the back room is empty and the rear door sticks like it's forgotten its purpose. People leave casseroles for widowers on different porches now. The prayer before dinner is shorter. Compassion was the mask. Control was the mission. If this story helped you see behind a facade, subscribe for daily investigations from buried files. And share this episode so the next person knows to vet the helpers who show up with a smile and a clipboard. Question the facade. Keep the lights on. Story 2: The Museum on Elm Street, Vermont. Millfield looked like a postcard until the names on the postcard stopped writing back. Details have been changed. The account draws on nonprofit filings, property records, and the notes of a single deputy who kept more than he was supposed to. Marcus arrives on a gray October morning with a camera bag and a list of friendly questions. His editor wants a Heritage Grant puff piece, the kind of column that prints between high school football scores and a pumpkin bread recipe. Millfield has just won $2 million to preserve its historic character, and the photographs practically frame themselves. A white steeple, a general store with a bell over the door, gas lamps glowing warm as butter at dusk. Eleanor Ashworth meets him on the steps of the museum like she descends them every morning in a different tasteful scarf. She is president of the Preservation Society, and the kind of person who says "we" when she means "I." Her handshake is firm, her smile perfectly measured, her tour flawless. Here are Civil War letters that never mention blood. Here is a map of the original plots, ink no one's fingerprints have smudged. Here is a display of early 1900s tools, all polished enough to shave in. Millfield is so tidy it makes Marcus uneasy. Paint doesn't chip, siding doesn't warp, leaves fall in curated piles. He asks casually where folks go when they leave. Oh, you know, Eleanor says, light as dust. Florida, the Cape, people come and go. When he requests a list of families who have moved in the last 5 years to track growth, the clerk at town hall flips through index cards and apologizes. Records are spotty, she says. We had a flood, basement. The word lands like a broom sweeping a question into a corner. Marcus spends the first day doing what he was sent to do, shoot pretty things. He photographs the church spire against maples that look hand-painted. He frames a shot of Main Street where every storefront has gold leaf on the glass. He captures Eleanor in the museum, chin lifted, hands folded like she belongs on a $20 bill. Then he starts to listen the way reporters are taught to listen. For what isn't said. At the diner, a waitress says, "Bless your heart," to every name he mentions, and none of those names come with forwarding addresses. At the library, the local history shelves hold every parade photo since 1950, but in the binder for the late '80s, 2 pages are missing, neatly cut with a precision blade. At the clerk's office, there are death certificates in careful order until there aren't. Entire months drop away, replaced by a note about that same flood in a hand that's far too tidy for panic. He asks about the flood again. Pipes, the clerk says, softer now. We lost a lot. Shame. He asks whether the data was digitized. The answer is a smile that doesn't involve teeth. The Preservation Society has a headquarters in the museum's rear wing. Eleanor calls it the engine room. Tax filings for a non-profit are public, and Marcus has sent off for the 990s before he drove up. They hit his inbox on day 3. He scrolls line items in the museum's shadow, the Wi-Fi named Preserve Elm 2, 4G. There are gala expenses and heating bills and archival supplies. There are also payments, steady, large, described as restoration consulting, to a company called Heritage Transport Services. The address is a P.O. box 2 towns over. The largest asset listed is a fleet of refrigerated trucks. He pulls property records at the county courthouse because paper is older than floods and more honest than guided tours. Foreclosures tell a story that smiles don't. The Preservation Society buys mortgages from banks, and the houses attached to those mortgages change hands when owners move away in a hurry. The sale prices are what you'd expect when someone packs at midnight. Deeds transfer to LLCs with patriotic names, and the member managers are cousins of board members, or board members themselves. Once you untangle the filings and squint at signatures, Marcus draws a list of names from the deed books and runs them against a state database of missing persons, because the hair on his arms has been trying to talk to him since the museum tour. 12 matches ping. That's too many for a town this size. Each file tells a short, sharp story. Adult leaves without telling anyone, withdraws cash, phone goes dark. Cases closed as voluntary disappearances. No bodies, no foul. He calls relatives and they do not call back. He calls again, and a sister with a careful voice agrees to meet, 30 miles away, at a diner where no one knows her face. She orders tea and doesn't drink it. Her brother retired from the paper mill with a pension and a plan to move south. He told her 3 days before he left that people were watching his house at night, that he'd found something rotten in the preservation committee's files, that he was getting copies, and then he'd explain. He died of a heart attack in his basement the next afternoon. He never used the basement because of his knees. The Preservation Society arranged a swift cremation per his wishes. Wishes no one ever saw in writing. She slides a manila envelope across the table. Inside is a program from the museum's spring fundraiser with the theme, A Town That Remembers, and a photocopy of a bill of sale for her brother's house dated 2 days after he died, notarized by a woman who sits on a leaner's board. "Don't call me again," the sister says, and means it kindly. She looks at the door every time it opens. Deputy Jim Kowski, broad-shouldered, buzz-cut, a man who knows where the bodies should be if there were any, answers questions at his desk with the radio turned up. He grew up here. He left. He came back. He has a mortgage and a kid in braces and a boss who doesn't like paperwork. He shouldn't talk. He talks anyway, in the way of someone whose conscience wakes him at night. "You didn't hear this from me," he says, and hands over a thumb drive with scans of incident reports that never made it to the state. Suspicious noise calls near the museum after hours. Complaints about a smell that isn't garbage and isn't gas. Patrol logs that loop Main Street in the small hours until the entries stop abruptly, replaced by the word special in all caps. Marcus doesn't sleep well after that. He dreams of stairs under the museum, cold air breathing up from somewhere that shouldn't breathe. He dreams of trucks rolling with the lights off. He checks out of his motel before dawn on a day when the fog sits knee-high on the soccer field, and he doesn't leave a forwarding address for whoever comes asking. He drives to a newsroom 2 counties over with his notes and copies of filings, and a list of names circled so hard the ink dents the paper. The expose is not one article. It's a season. It runs in parts with sidebars and graphics, and a box explaining how to read a 990, because readers ask and the paper decides to teach them. The first story is about the money, cool, verifiable, unemotional, the shell company, the trucks, the payments. The second is property, transfers, foreclosures, below-market sales, dates that make bad sense. The third is people, the missing, the quick cremations, the sister who drinks tea that's long cold. The fourth is power, a leaner's board, the deputy's special logs, the contractors who get the museum's business and the permits that get approved and the ones that don't. By the end of the week, the state attorney general has issued a statement with more verbs than adjectives. By the end of the month, federal agents have taken a measured interest in a town that used to be content with parades. The raid on the museum happens on a Tuesday because everything serious happens on a weekday when you have to be somewhere else. The tapes go up first, not dramatic, just inevitable. Trucks idle in the street while agents carry out boxes labeled archives and IT and evidence. A leaner descends those steps again, this time without a scarf, her mouth a straight line that makes her look older. The basement is larger than you'd think from the footprint, carved back in ways that don't match the building plans. What lives there is a logistics dream and a moral nightmare. A door that locks from the outside, drains cut into concrete, hooks whose purpose you pray you're wrong about. In a ledger, there are columns that do not match any card catalog. Intake, storage, outbound. The refrigerated trucks at the shell company's yard are wiped clean, but for the faint chemical smell you cannot mistake once you smell it. Tires carry a story of miles that skip way stations. GPS pings recovered from cheap trackers pulse a map that leads to cities with ports and fences and cash. Charges fall like dominoes that had been standing longer than anyone guessed. Kidnapping, trafficking, murder. People who sat on boards resign from boards. People who poured wine at galas turn in keys. Bank accounts freeze. The Preservation Society's motto, keeping Millfield, reads curdled on the masthead of a newsletter that now serves as Discovery. Eleanor is escorted out the back of the museum she curated like a life's work. She does not look back. The town does not die. Small towns don't. They thin. Windows go dark. The gas lamps still glow at night, but fewer shadows cross the light. Houses sit with for sale signs that yellow at the edges. The Christmas parade is shorter. The grant money that brought Marcus here gets frozen, reallocated, investigated. The steeple still points at the sky. The hymn is quieter. Marcus doesn't get satisfaction exactly. He gets calls at odd hours from people who begin with, "I can't talk long." He gets one letter handwritten that says simply, "Thank you for naming it." He keeps the thumb drive from Deputy Kowski in his desk at home, not because he needs the files, but because the weight in his palm reminds him what it cost a man with a mortgage to make a copy. He drives past other towns now and watches how tidy the paint is. He asks more questions about basements. They preserve the buildings and erase the people. If you want to learn how to read the receipts for yourself, tap the bell. Tomorrow we'll show you how to pull a nonprofit's 990 in 10 minutes and what lines to circle before anyone tells you a story about a flood. Share this episode with someone who still believes paper trails don't talk. They do. They always do. Story 3. The Alliances Favor Alabama. In Cedar Grove, you didn't need a loan. You needed protection. This account is a composite drawn from sworn statements and federal indictments. Names and identifying details have been changed. Sun comes up over Highway 82 and slides under the bay door of a former gas station where Tommy Rodriguez is building a life. He's got 2 used lifts, a coffee pot that never quite turns off, and a reputation that travels faster than flyers. Honest, fair, explains what's broken before he charges to fix it. Farmers roll in with trucks that wear their miles on the fenders. Retirees bring sedans that know every church parking lot in the county. Young couples limp in on a donut spare and limp out on 4 good tires, and a payment plan Tommy wrote on a yellow pad. Business is good enough that he starts thinking about buying the building. That's when the Cadillac parks a little crooked, and 3 people in summer suits step out like the weather doesn't touch them. The man in front does most of the talking, broad shoulders, practiced smile, introduces himself as Frank Buchanan, Executive Director of the Cedar Grove Business Alliance. He's flanked by Mayor Patricia Donnelly and a man named Charles Webb who shakes hands without grip, like contact is a favor. The pitch is friendly until it isn't. The alliance isn't the Chamber of Commerce exactly, more like a coordination hub to keep Cedar Grove prosperous. Monthly dues are $500. There are assessments as needed. In return, members get priority on permits, quick inspections, pooled advertising, and this phrase lands like a dropped wrench, protection from unfair competition. "We keep things smooth," Frank says, tapping his forefinger softly on Tommy's counter. "New businesses sometimes don't understand local conditions. We make sure nobody gets hurt." Tommy's parents didn't leave Mexico and work their hands raw so he could pay protection by a softer name. He thanks them for stopping by and says he'll pass. The smile on Frank's face drops a degree, still warm, no heat. The next week, the city building inspector appears without an appointment and measures things that have never been measured before. The week after, the fire marshal arrives and reads aloud from code sections like scripture, circling outlets with a red Sharpie that bleeds. 2 days later, a state environmental officer pulls into the lot and asks about oil disposal, then tells Tommy, sympathetically, that someone called in a tip. Each visit ends with a list. Fines now, fixes in 30 days, a warning about closures if deadlines slip. The lists are long enough to reach the register. Business doesn't stop, not at first. But trust is fragile and rumor is a solvent. A regular asks if it's true Tommy uses cheap parts. Another wonders, awkwardly, if Tommy's insurance is tied up, because she heard something at the diner. A guy from the tire place 2 towns over mentions, not unkindly, that a few folks say state's looking at you. Tommy laughs it off until he realizes the laughter sounds like a cough. Janet Morris comes by after closing on a Tuesday with a pan of brownies and the look of someone who has decided to talk. She is the kind of elderly you hope to become, sharp, stubborn, kind. She has been one of his first customers, a Buick loyalist. At the grocery store, she says, Frank Buchanan took her hand and told her it might be legally risky to keep bringing her car here, given ongoing investigations. He suggested she consider alliance-affiliated shops for her protection, and if cost was a concern, there were member discounts. He lowered his voice when he said discounts, like the word itself might get fined. Janet has lived here long enough to collect stories, and she unfolds them like receipts. A restaurant owner who declined to join the alliance woke to a kitchen fire that started in wiring a contractor swears he inspected the week before. Insurance paid out, and within a month, an alliance member's cousin had the lease. A competing shop across town had a gas explosion, the kind no one hears until the roof is gone. That owner had mentioned at Rotary that he wasn't a club guy. Break-ins that steal nothing but hard drives. Water main repairs that only ever cut service to non-members. Contractors who suddenly can't find time on the calendar. You can call it folklore, a small town's way of keeping itself wired tight with fear, or you can do what Tommy does the next morning and check the courthouse. Property records are patient. They don't argue. In those deed books, Tommy sees the skeleton of a pattern. The burned restaurant sells for a fraction to a shell LLC called Pinecone Investments. Pinecone's mailing address is a P.O. box that's also on the Business Alliance website. The exploded shop's lot is bought by an entity named CG Redevelopment, which, paper says, lists Mayor Donnelly's husband as an officer. He pulls fire reports and finds phrases like electrical suspected and gas leak likely, signed off neatly, no follow-up recommended. He pulls insurance filings and sees payouts that line up like coins on a bar. Back in his office, he starts recording. Voice memos of every surprise inspection. Phone calls where a permit official says off the record and then never calls back. He keeps emails that begin just a friendly reminder and end with 23 bullet points. When Frank drops by again, sans mayor, with a narrower smile, Tommy turns his phone face down on the counter and lets it listen while Frank explains how dues are an investment, and we'd hate to see misunderstandings become a problem. Tommy is not alone. He learns this by driving 20 minutes and then 40, stopping at coffee shops where the napkins advertise small-town festivals. In Mapleside, a woman who runs a hair salon describes the business council that appeared when she refused to sell. In River Glen, a guy who repairs HVAC systems knows industry partners who set prices in group chats and flag anyone who undercuts. In each town, the names change. The nouns don't. Alliance, council, partnership, initiative. In each town, mysterious inspections follow refused invitations. In each town, shell companies with nice logos swallow property taken off the board by fire, flood, or rumor. The night the shop gets hit is quiet and mean. They don't take tools or cash, they take folders. File drawers are pried, manila guts are messily rifled. The office computer is powered on but dead, its drive removed with care. The break-in tells Tommy two things. He is seen, and he is close enough to scare them. He sits in the dark office with the porch light on and waits for anger to cool into decision. The FBI office in Birmingham answers on the third transfer. Organized crime and public corruption isn't some movie unit with a glass wall and an angry boss. It's two agents in a beige suite who drink burnt coffee and care a lot about dates. Tommy brings what he has: copies of permit letters, voice recordings, photos of citation sticker clusters that feel punitive rather than protective. He brings printouts of LLC filings with the same three names appearing like recurring characters. He brings a list of other business owners willing to talk if someone bigger than the fire marshal returns their calls. Cases like this don't explode, they accumulate. The feds don't storm City Hall, they ask for things. They serve subpoenas that land without sound. They compare insurance payouts to campaign donations. They pull phone logs that show late-night texts from a mayor to a code officer after a non-member posts a sale on Facebook. They map out shell companies like a family tree you don't invite to Thanksgiving. The pattern that felt like superstition turns into exhibits that fit on easels. It turns out Cedar Grove's alliance is a franchise, and not the official kind. It plugs into a network that shares strategies at church barbecues and county fairs. How to cite noise violations that never get measured. How to lean on banks when a non-member needs a line increase. How to whisper EPA and watch business go soft. The emails say market discipline. The texts say make him feel it. When the indictments become public, the press conference is small, eyes bigger than the microphones. The U.S. attorney uses the word racketeering, which is what RICO spells when it's tired of acronyms. Frank Buchanan is led out of a brick building with a jacket over his cuffed hands. Mayor Donnelly's statement mentions regrettable misunderstandings and a dark day for collaboration. Charles Webb smiles like someone who expects to bounce. There are City Hall resignations given in language that keeps the pensions safe. A fire marshal retires. An inspector moves to a different county where the code books are thinner. Tommy opens his bay door the next morning and the sun finds the same dust in the air, but it looks different. People trickle back as if returning were a favor they'd been waiting for permission to grant. I guess you're okay now. One man jokes and then apologizes for the joke. A local bank manager, suddenly emboldened, stops by to say they're reviewing small business lending practices, which is a sentence that would have been dangerous to speak aloud a month ago. It is not a victory parade. It's receipts and rehires and a slow walk back to normal. The empty restaurant lot grows weeds. The exploded shop slab is still warm in memory. Tommy balances fines he can't appeal against invoices that finally get paid. He keeps 2 backup drives now. He keeps his phone on the counter, screen dark, just in case voices need to be collected again. There's a moment weeks later when a kid in a band shirt sits in a cracked vinyl chair and watches his first car rise on Tommy's lift like a promise. Tommy thought the whole thing would sour him. Instead, it made him clear. He will never again mistake a welcome packet for a handshake for a contract for consent. It wasn't commerce. It was a cover charge. If this helped you spot the difference, hit like so the algorithm shows it to the next owner getting a friendly visit. Share it with someone who thinks alliances can't be rackets because the logo has a leaf in it. And if you've got a story about help that came with threats, tell us. If help comes with threats, it's not help. Story 4, the summer of '65. Harmony prided itself on remembering just not that summer. Names and certain details have been changed. What follows draws from regional newspapers, estate scrapbooks, and the damaged edges of an archive that fails in all the most convenient places. Professor Sarah Mitchell drives into Harmony, Kansas, with a trunk full of legal pads and a polite ambition. Write the town's sesquicentennial book, take a few porch photos, stitch a warm quilt of pioneers and parades. The water tower says welcome in a font that makes the word look permanent. Wheat rides the wind to the horizon. At the library, the head librarian Grace, 37 years on the job and counting, hands over a ring of keys and a smile. Basement's where the good stuff is, she says. Pardon the boxes. There was a flood back in the '80s. We lost more than I care to remember. Flood is a useful word. It explains everything without proving anything. Sarah reads minutes from city council meetings as if they are short stories about potholes and patriotism. She learns that Harmony debated curb heights for 3 meetings in 1954 and once tabled a motion about public benches so someone could bring cookies. She learns that the Historical Committee, now chaired by Councilman Robert Hayes, whose great-grandfather laid out the original plats, decides what counts as history and who gets to tell it. She learns that certain years sheen over like ice, shelves thin where they should thicken, index cards list missing next to the exact months when dissent is rumored to have spoken too loud. When she asks about gaps, Grace repeats the flood. We did our best to dry what we could. She says it like an apology and like an order both. 2 weeks in, Sarah is invited to Robert Hayes's office at the insurance agency. He is soft-spoken, careful with compliments, generous with advice about scope. We want a book that brings people together, he says, not one that reopens old disagreements. He slides over a list of topics the committee is especially proud of. A centennial parade, the Boys' Corn Club of 1912, a farmer who invented a better plow tooth. We've got photos for all of it, he promises. Whatever you need. The attic box arrives by accident like most of the truth. A woman named Elaine is cleaning her late mother's house before putting it on the market. She finds a carton above the rafters, taped and labeled in pencil, Harmony, keep. She calls the library because she doesn't know who else to call. It's mostly junk, she says, but there are clippings. Grace is suddenly busy that afternoon. Sarah offers to swing by on her way to the archive. The box is dust and brittle edges and a breath that smells like old glue. Inside, yellowed newspapers from Topeka and Kansas City, Polaroids of church picnics where faces are circled in ink. A school roster with 13 names crossed out and a note in the margin moved. Then a second note, no forwarding. The clippings begin in June 1965 when the wheat was high and the nights were kind. By August, the headlines share a refrain: families depart without notice. 13 households vanish. State police investigate unusual migration. 57 people in 6 weeks. The numbers feel wrong in a place this small, like a barn door left open on purpose. The families were not drifters. They had laid their lives down like fence posts, a foundation poured on cedar, lumber delivered and stacked, children pre-registered for fall classes, a letter to a sister in Salina about the joy of finally finding a place that fit. Then silence. Houses sold through a Topeka law firm that closed decades ago. Sales recorded in neat cursive. Prices low enough to embarrass a buyer who had a conscience. Buyers with names that repeat: Hayes, Peterson, Koch, old families that took their history like a birthright. Sarah asks around carefully, the way you test a wire for current. Elderly residents remember unpleasantness and times of change. Younger people know nothing and seem relieved to keep it that way. At the barber, a story begins and ends with folks found better prospects. At the diner, a woman traces the lip of her coffee cup and says, "They were nice, new, they didn't quite understand how we do things," and doesn't say who we is or what understanding costs. Back in the basement, the flood grows more targeted. Entire folders are intact except for the one sheet that would hold a petition to allow stores to open on Sundays. A school board file bulges with reports, but lacks the month a group of parents proposed an updated curriculum without daily religious recitations. The historical committee minutes are a run of glowing adjectives, then a hole, then a resolution praising community harmony and respect for tradition. Sarah widens the circle. County courthouse records paint in lines the library erased. Property deeds from the late summer of '65 shuffle homes from newcomers to old guard families through the same Topeka firm, its attorney's signature looping like a smile. The same week a house sells below market, a missing persons report is filed 2 counties over by a cousin who expects dinner and finds dust. State police logs note large-scale searches of creek beds and windbreaks. No remains. No good explanations. Patterns sharpen when you're willing to look past the frame. Every family that vanished had signed a letter, polite, brave, asking the council to consider Sunday shopping, to let music beyond hymns play at the town hall, to consider a school policy that didn't bind civic life to a single church. They were not radicals, just neighbors with ideas about modern life. They used the word inclusive once, and it grows teeth as it moves through retellings. When Sarah brings preliminary notes to Robert Hayes, his smile drops but does not disappear. "We're concerned about tone," he says. "We've heard you're asking around about unpleasant chapters. It would be a shame to lose our momentum." His voice lowers. People here value stability. They're wary of outsiders imposing narratives. He turns a page in her draft and taps a paragraph about missing families. "This is speculative," he says. "It makes us vulnerable." The next day, a truck idles at the end of her rental's gravel drive without moving for 10 minutes. That night, her email fills with friendly warnings about professional reputation and fit for the project. A neighbor says she should stick to the good parts. The library closes the basement early for maintenance. Grace won't meet her eyes. Sarah stops sleeping like she used to. She makes copies of copies, stashes them in separate envelopes. She scans the most fragile clippings and sends them to herself, subject lines coded. She rents a box in the next town and mails a set there. She learns to move like a rumor, quiet and everywhere. She tries law enforcement. A young detective in the county seat gives her a look full of empathy and limits. Statute of limitations, he says, palms up. Most of what you're implying, if it happened, was half a century back. We can note it. We can't try it. And when she mentions the Topeka firm, he nods. Closed in 78. Attorney deceased. Records boxed and unindexed in a warehouse that floods every spring. The word floods again, obedient and useful. The historical committee votes. Without a vote, she hears, to reassess project leadership. Robert calls it a pause. The letter says her services are no longer needed. The replacement is local, a retired teacher with good intentions and no interest in basements. Sarah resigns before the resignation lands. She writes a note that says only what she can prove and sends it to 3 places that still care about footnotes. Then she leaves, not in anger but in the kind of fear that knows its own name. The book comes out on schedule, glossy and well-behaved. There's a chapter on barn raisings, a spread on the Centennial Parade, a 2-page photo essay on quilts. The summer of '65 gets 6 sentences about significant demographic transition, positioned between a recipe for collages and a snapshot of a tractor show. The names that should be there are not there. The water tower looks the same. What remains is not nothing. In the county records, a clerk who reads after hours has placed sticky notes with question marks next to deeds dated '65. In a church hall, a woman keeps a scrapbook under her chair and looks at it during long prayers. In an envelope addressed to no one, Sarah keeps a school roster with 13 names crossed out and the word moved written twice in 2 different hands. She teaches her students how to verify flood lost records, how to rebuild timelines from peripheral paper, utility hookups, school enrollments, lumber receipts. She tells them to ask what a town chooses to remember and who pays for the forgetting. Harmony hosts its celebration with bunting and a brass band. Visitors comment on how well preserved everything is, how friendly everyone seems. A child runs past a display of yearbooks with a gap where a row of faces should be. No one stops the band. The wheat keeps moving like a sea that knows the shore is a story someone invented so they wouldn't have to look too far. Some monuments are built from silence. If you want the tools to verify flood lost records and rebuild the timeline anyway, subscribe. We'll show you how to follow the paper when memory refuses to. Share this with someone who still believes a tidy archive means a tidy past. When memory fails, paper remembers. Story 5, The Garden Club Standard. The lawns were immaculate, the ethics weren't. This account draws on municipal complaints, HOA letters, and whistleblower files. Names and some details have been changed. Jennifer Walsh moved to Willowbrook because it looked like a promise. 30 minutes from the city, maples arched over brick colonials, and every front step had the same polite welcome mat. On her second day, an elegant woman in a silk scarf rang the bell, handed over a handwritten invitation, and said her name as if it came with a seal. Victoria Sterling, President, Willowbrook Garden Club. 2 meetings a month, community service projects, group discounts at nurseries, and Victoria's smile warmed on this line. A chance to keep Willowbrook Willowbrook. Belonging came gift-wrapped. Shopkeepers knew Jennifer's name before her second latte. A landscaper returned her call in 10 minutes. At the first club meeting, coffee, pastries, a slide deck on native wildflowers, Victoria presided like a conductor who never missed a cue. Questions were answered, volunteers assigned, a fundraiser announced with a cadence that made suggested donation feel like civic duty. Members laughed easily and dressed like wealth was tasteful, not loud. It felt like safety wearing pearls. The first time Jennifer heard the Kramers mentioned, it sounded like concern. "They're getting on," someone said, stirring tea. "He's not well." The yard, the ellipsis did more work than the sentence. The Kramers lived 3 blocks over in a 1930s colonial that had once been a garden tour centerpiece. Now the hedges went shaggy, leaves collected on the porch. A rusting mower sat like an accusation beside the garage. Jennifer suggested what seemed obvious: organize a group to help. Victoria's smile thinned to something elegant and cold. "We preserve standards. We don't enable neglect." Within a week, the city's code office, prompted by anonymous complaints, left bright orange violation notices on the Kramer door. A letter from their insurer followed, warning of hazard conditions and a possible policy review. A neighbor paused on the sidewalk and said, "Just loud enough. Property values can't take this." None of it sounded like help. When the Kramers tried to hire the landscaper Jennifer used, he apologized and said his schedule had filled overnight. 2 other crews stopped returning calls. A handyman who'd fixed a porch step for decades suddenly doubled his rate. Victoria's friend at the real estate office sent the Kramers a tasteful brochure titled "Right-Sizing Your Life." Jennifer's unease collected in a file. Screenshots of next-door threads about keeping standards. Photos of violation stickers clustered like hives. Minutes from garden club meetings that used the word compliance more than tulips. Volunteering to help with club records put her in the office closet, where plastic bins labeled archive held 30 years of carefully sorted paper. That's where the shape of it emerged. The files weren't just about flowers. They cataloged families, addresses, routines, who hosted noisy barbecues, who painted the porch non-compliant colors, who resisted joining. There were spreadsheets tracking non-conforming households with columns for kids, ages/temperament, dogs, breed/barks, finances, leverage/late taxes. Handwritten notes in a looping, confident script. Victoria's suggested pressure vectors, code enforcement, tax reassessment, service denials. It read like a strategy deck with begonias on the cover. Jennifer told herself she was overreacting. Then she opened a folder labeled Incidents Elderly. In it, clipped obituaries and internal summaries of accidents, falls in bathtubs, medication mix-ups, heat strokes with the AC mysteriously off, each attached to a house that had been the subject of complaints, each followed by a quick sale to buyers who showed up fast and paid cash. Names repeated: a councilman's sister, a developer on the club's donor list. A detective's signature appeared on several case closures. His last name was O'Brien. His wife chaired the club's welcome committee. Jennifer called the state investigator line listed on the Attorney General's website. She described what she'd found carefully, like dismantling a trap she wasn't sure was armed. The woman on the phone was calm and asked for copies. Jennifer scanned until midnight, sent files in batches, then shut her laptop and slept badly. The oleander appeared 2 days later. A beautiful arrangement, pink blossoms in a simple white pot, the kind you see in catalog photos of tasteful entryways. It sat dead center on her kitchen table when she came home. The door showed no sign of forced entry. There was no card. Jennifer grew up with a mother who loved detective novels. She knew exactly what oleander was. She lifted the pot with a dish towel and carried it to the sink, heart banging like a screen door in a storm. The message was not subtle. We can walk in. Fear reorders your plans. She bought a cheap motion camera for the back door. She photographed the scratches around the lock on her patio slider, the ones you only notice when you're looking for them. She emailed the state investigator again with urgent in the subject line, and then drove to the next town over to scan the most sensitive files at a public library. On the way home, a black SUV sat 2 cars behind her for 6 lights and then turned away. The Kramers moved within 6 months. They sold to a developer who gutted the house down to the studs and replanted the lawn in a species the club preferred. At the next meeting, Victoria praised community stewardship and presented a slideshow of before and after shots in which the trees looked tidier and the history looked erased. Jennifer took the entire incidents, elderly folder and the spreadsheets of non-conforming families, to the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. She expected to be dismissed or told to come back with a lawyer. Instead, an agent with a tired tie and careful questions asked for dates, connections, and copies of every letter that used the word standard. She brought municipal complaint logs, easily FOIA'd when you know how, showing that code enforcement aligned perfectly with garden club email campaigns titled Eyes on Maple Ave and Summer Standards Push. She brought plat maps that traced quick post obituary sales to LLCs whose mailing addresses matched donors on the club's gala poster. She brought a list of Detective O'Brien's cases with asterisks where his wife's emails referenced non-compliant seniors and safety hazards. The agents didn't rush. They compared the club's internal notes to code enforcement timestamps. They subpoenaed insurer records and found anonymous tips sent from the same 3 IP addresses, 2 at City Hall, 1 at a member's design firm. They asked a judge for a quiet order to search digital backups of the club's beautification drive folders. The backups contained drafts with tracked changes that read like stage direction. If citations don't move them, push insurance. If that fails, reassess taxes. I have a line to the assessor. Detective O'Brien's conflict of interest was not a conflict in his reports. His signatures closed files with sentences like "no foul play suspected" and declined autopsy per family. The families, when interviewed months later by federal investigators, said they were guided through a very difficult time by Mrs. O'Brien and Mrs. Sterling, and told cremation was kindest and efficient. A hospice nurse remembered the power going out at a house that never lost power before. A pharmacist recalled a sudden switch in a dosage that no doctor ordered and no one could later explain. Indictments landed on a weekday morning when Willowbrook's lawns were at their dewiest. Conspiracy, elder abuse, insurance fraud, obstruction. Victoria Sterling's mugshot looked like a driver's license photo taken on a day when the camera told the truth. Detective O'Brien turned in his badge and a key ring that was heavier than it needed to be. A city code officer resigned for health reasons. The assessor found an opportunity in another county. The club deleted its Facebook page and replaced it with a statement about misunderstandings and our deep love for this community. Willowbrook stayed pretty. The hydrangeas still bloomed. The welcome signs still made Instagram. But the smiles got thinner. HOA meetings started later and lasted longer. People asked more questions about anonymous complaints and safety, when the target of either was a widower with a stubborn mower. A new president took the garden club gavel and promised reform, transparency, a return to our roots. No one said out loud what those roots had wrapped themselves around. Jennifer moved. Not far, not in fear, but out of loyalty to herself. Her new porch has mismatched pots and a lawn that tolerates clover. She keeps a file of documents that taught her how power can wear pearls and carry pruning shears. She also keeps a simple rule. If community standards need threats to stand, they're not standards, they're weapons. They weaponize taste.